This is Naked Mormonism.
I pledge my life, all that I may have. I will strive to the utmost of my ability to be what you would want me to be.
It's time to find the truth.
And having set our hand to the plow, we will never look back until this work is finished.
Where is the church heading?
I have faith that the Constitution will be saved as prophesied by Joseph Smith. But it will not be saved in Washington. It will be saved by enlightened members of this church.
The explicit tag is there for a reason, so if you get offended at what's said, it's not for you. But most importantly,
May you ponder the truths you've heard. May they help you become even better than you were.
skepticize everything.
You wanted it, and here it is. The completely uncut, raw discussion that I had with supporter and patron Jay. Sit back and enjoy.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
There we go. Oh, yeah. Wow, that really sounds a lot better right away, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's way better now. And I can hear you way better now, too.
Okay, great. Hey, sorry about all that Luddite headache there.
No, I appreciate you doing that. That'll make it a lot better.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's just kind of like jump right into the what you're wanting to do here. What topic did you kind of want to start with? Did you want to kind of tell your story, basically, how you came out of the church, what got you to come out of the church, or do you want to start further back, how you got into the church, were you born into it?
Yeah, I guess, and I don't remember hearing you do this kind of interview with anybody else yet, and so I'm not sure what the format, how much detail you want to have.
I mean, I'm just looking for a nice, candid conversation. Feel free to introduce yourself to a level that you feel comfortable with.
Okay.
I don't know if you wanted to use last name or just keep it just Jay, or if you wanted to use a pseudonym, it's your call completely.
Yeah.
But feel free to kind of introduce yourself. Say, hey, I live in San Francisco. I grew up in fill in the blank, and then just kind of tell your story starting out there.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, I'll just go with Jay without a last name for now.
Okay, perfect.
And that would work. That would be probably fine. So, all right, great. So whenever you're ready.
All right, absolutely. Let me do a little bit of an introduction here.
And actually, you want to get you on chat so I can send you, I know sometimes on conference calls, it's nice to be able to IM somebody to ask them to say something, without having to actually say it. So
absolutely. Let's see here.
Does that come through?
Yes.
You got it? Okay.
Oh, come on, you stupid computer. Oh, come on. Why won't it let me send you a message back?
Does it think? No, I think I must be logged in.
Yeah.
Oh, something just buzzed, which was that's my daughter texting me. So.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, I don't see you. And that's not that important, because basically if I'm going to text you something, and if I did text anything, then it might just be for you to ask something or something. So. And
honestly, I mean, I'm a wizard with editing, so if there's something, I mean, I can edit anything in or out that needs to be. So it shouldn't be any problem. If you want to like go on to a different topic, I mean, feel free to transition as clumsily as you want. I'll make it sound all right.
Okay, I just don't want to make a lot of work for you, so.
No. It's all a pretty baseline level of work. I am well aware of what it is.
Okay.
So don't worry about it.
Great.
All right. So let me think of a little intro here. Welcome to this special edition of this Naked Mormonism podcast. This is just a Patreon listener discussion special edition. We're not covering any history or anything that's has to do with the church directly itself. We're just getting a little bit of a backstory on a listener that's been gracious enough to be a patron for a long time and has been in pretty good contact with the show for quite a while, and it's obviously given me some lines on good things that I need to research and stuff. So I'm joined today by Jay. Jay, are you there?
I'm there. I'm here.
Awesome. All right. So, as I'm to understand it, you kind of grew up Mormon. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm 51, and I was born into a Mormon family. I don't know, 4 or 5 generations back. Way back on the mother's side, a Danish gentleman, Nikolai Sorensen, came from a little town in Denmark in the 1850s or 60s, and the family on both sides has been in the Utah and Idaho area since a heck of a long time.
All right, very nice. So that was your great grandfather. Is that correct then, this Nikolai gentleman?
I think I have to dig up the genealogy charts, but I think it's great, or it might be great grandfather. So, one of the benefits of being in a Mormon family, especially in the 60s and 70s, was in my case at least, was my mother in particular was always doing genealogy work. So I'm fortunate to know more about my forebears than many people probably do,
Let's just go ahead and point that out right now. I mean, genealogy is a huge thing with the church. I mean, somebody in my family is the ward church, like the genealogy expert, and my grandma has done a 3-year mission of just doing genealogy work. Like, it's a big thing inside the church. A lot of people do it. Yeah,
and of course it's doctrinal as to why to do that, and it's so that we can foist. So we can foist Mormonism on the unfortunates, quote unquote, that never heard it. So in a lot of ways, this religion has a logical something, at least at the surface, seems to be a logical answer for many of the doctrinal questions that other Christian sects, cults, maybe we'd call them. But if you have enough members, you're not a cult anymore.
Well, yeah, I guess that's just a definitional hair splitting. But yeah, I mean that is let's talk about why the church has this focus on genealogy. It's this doctrinal focus on it because apparently there's going to be a massive resurrection, and at that time we're going to be able to do all of the genealogy of all the generations of people that lived before that we don't have a record of.
Yeah, and the thing that they kind of missed when they dreamt that whole thing up is this little molecule called DNA. Which actually is a serious.
You can't ignore it either.
No, well, you can. You can pretend that the Earth is flat. You can pretend that the Earth is the center of the universe. You can pretend that for quite a long time, and apparently a certain number of people will still believe it, despite all evidence to the contrary. Actually, there's a wonderful phrase that every freethinker or atheist even should have in their vocabulary, I think, and it's a phrase that Galileo was reputed to have said back in 1460, somewhere in there, and the phrase is "Eppure si muove," and that's Italian for, if you maybe already know this, so you can stop me if I'm bloviating on that.
No, keep going. I'm interested.
So the phrase "Eppure si muove," and there's a nice little Wikipedia page on this, and the phrase means, quote, "and still it moves," unquote. And the context of that was that Galileo, as he was being essentially persecuted for having the temerity to say that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, that he constantly was harassed for that. And actually, of course, he was put under house arrest for the last X years of his life because it was against the doctrine of the Holy Roman Church to say that the Earth was not the center of the universe, because man is the most important creation and Earth is where man lives. So therefore, man and Earth must be the center. And Galileo would constantly would say that no matter what you say about science, in reality, the Earth still moves around the sun and not the other way. And that's where the phrase "Eppure si muove" became at least somewhat famous. But it's a wonderful phrase to use. It's a concept that I think we can keep in mind whenever we're being hectored or badgered by people who are making essentially truth claims, based on religious faith, when those truth claims, which are statements about reality, that those truth claims can actually be independently verified. And that's a wonderful phrase.
The big problem with so many doctrines, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, something that's so appealing about the Mormon Church is it seems to have some kind of logical answer to every theological conundrum that has challenged Christianity for so long. whether the answer is vague or if it's just a slight morphing. No, don't worry about that. You're doing great. Just feel free to just talk all you want. So it seems very appealing to people that are that have argued these different tenets of Christianity about what happens to people after they die, or if they have been baptized, or the practice of baptism itself, or I mean, there's so many of these confusing things that that Mormonism obviously brings some kind of reasoning into. So that's I think one thing that's really challenging about or something that's difficult about challenging a member's beliefs is they have these logical conclusions that they've chased their theology to, and internally it does make sense. That's why people will still be members. But I mean, once you examine it really hard, once you really get into it, I mean, it just starts, one piece falls apart, and then it's just a house of cards that falls down. So that being said, I kind of wanted to get into what happened with you. Like, when did you come out of the church? Why did you come out? What did you discover?
Yeah, so I left the church the day after I returned from my mission. I don't think I've ever gone back to a meeting ever since then, and that day was sometime in summer of 1985. So I was, as I mentioned, I was born into a whatever generation family. My father's was an Army officer, so we moved a lot, and lived. I had the opportunity. It was a wonderful opportunity to live in different parts of the world. And that kind of gave me the idea that I wanted to travel. And so I think just for lack of having a reasonable alternative or something that seemed reasonable to me presented to me, I went through all the motions, and I'm in a solid active family, and everywhere we move, we immediately have a whole universe of friends in the church.
Well, and so, let me ask you something real quick then. So obviously the church is stronger in some parts of the world as opposed to other parts. Did you notice that, like, membership, how fundamentalist and how dogmatic the people were about the church? Did you notice that kind of shifting as you went around to these different parts of the world?
Well, I think that there is something there, but it's not exactly that in my experience. As I later came to live in Utah for a while, I went to the University of Utah. I just absolutely could not tolerate going to BYU. I knew that was never going to happen for me, although my two brothers did. But when I came to live in Utah, I saw sort of a different version of Mormonism than the version, vastly oversimplifying, but there's the U.S. version, which is Idaho, Canada, California, and Salt Lake, Utah, probably, and even Utah's got various strains. But then let me finish my theme on that. There's kind of another version of Mormonism, which is it's us against the world, right? Because when you're in a Mormon church in Finland, which is where I lived for 4 years when I was a kid, it was a wonderful experience. I didn't really appreciate it at that time. But if you're in a Mormon family, in a Mormon ward in Finland, you are 1 in a million, right? But if you're a Mormon in Highland, or in Sandy, you're 999 out of 1,000. It might seem.
Yeah. So, and just for clarification for the listeners, Sandy and Highland are different, are cities that are just east of Salt Lake City, up near the Bench area.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of saw that as a distinction, not as much a super fundamentalist or not as fundamentalist version, but more of a we're a special people, we're a peculiar people. Of course, that was actually said first by Paul, if I remember, not any Mormon person, but we Mormons co-opted a lot of phrases, and of course they ignore the ones they don't like, but grab the ones they do. So that seemed to be a big dichotomy in terms of the way that the people think about being in the church. It was, at least in my experience. And so when I went on a mission to Taiwan, then I was really 1 in a million, because the Chinese, and Taiwan is really culturally part of China, and the Chinese have no real use for much of Western anything, and certainly they don't need whatever 19 or 21-year-old Mormons with kids with the name elder, which is ludicrous for a teenager, to come and tell a Chinese person about the meaning of life they're just not interested.
And tell them about where the American Indians came from as well.
Well, and let's not go back yet, at least to the DNA, which is, irrefutably proven that entire story is complete horseshit. I mean, sorry.
No, it's absolutely true. That's the amazing thing about it. You can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the things that are held inside the Book of Mormon are factually inaccurate, completely wrong.
Yeah,
but
completely wrong.
Believers will still cling to it for I can't figure out why. I mean, I clung to it for a little while, but I found this new evidence and I was like, okay, wow, this is an absolute sham. It's all bullshit. I need to get out of it. But I don't know how people can hear this, understand the actual facts of it, understand that the Book of Mormon is a farce, and still believe in it. Blows my mind.
Well, I'm part of why I find Mormonism still fascinating, and religion in general as sort of as a way that people think about the world, is that we as humans evolved first and foremost to survive, and survive is not the same as think rationally. And so I think in a lot of psychology books and popular psychology types of books that I've studied and read, they really make it pretty clear that the way the brain works is we are really a bundle of contradictions and logical fallacies. And you think at some level, boy, why are people so bad at thinking logically? And the other level, it's worked pretty well. We're still here. But when you come down to an individual trying to assess a particular worldview, say Mormonism, it's quite easy for the individual to fall into any of 20 different logical fallacies and fail to see what to you and me might seem to be very obvious. So a key takeaway, it's not intelligence. It's not saying people that are religious aren't intelligent. It's not saying that. It's saying we're all human, and we just have to be very aware of our internal logical biases that we have, and we have to keep those in mind. But I think it's dangerous to make it sound like people that are religious are just not smart, because that's not true at all.
And I mean, I would venture to say that historically speaking, survival has favored the people that are not necessarily rational, because rationality takes time, and it takes time to think, and it takes calories. It takes a lot of brain power to actually figure something out rationally. So when, historically speaking, on an evolutionary scale, when we're walking through the jungle and we see the bushes shake in front of us, it's much better for us to have run away from whatever it was,
even if it was
never knowing what it was, and we survive, as opposed to trying and rationalizing what it is, or trying to come to some sort of grips of what is actually there. It might be a rabbit. It might be a predatory cat that wants to eat your face. So, I mean, it's much easier to just run away from it and not deal with the problem, as opposed to trying to rationally comprehend what's going on.
Well, I think you're on the right track with that, and that's a pretty standard line of analysis by Dawkins and others, is that concept, and a related idea which really reinforces a religious worldview is this concept of agency. At least that's the way I'm putting it, and maybe there's a better term for it. But the idea that things happen because something is making them happen. And the thing that's making them happen is not, the thermodynamic property of molecules. It's raining because God wanted it to rain. It's not raining because the relative humidity of the air exceeded 100%, and therefore the moisture in the air forms into raindrops and then falls to the ground. That's not why it's raining. It's raining because God wants it to rain. So we see
lightning is just Zeus throwing lightning bolts across the sky. I mean, it's so much simpler to make sense of the world without the scientific method if we just create these beings that are responsible for what's happening. But I mean, as we've slowly gained the scientific tools for analyzing it, I mean, we've just pushed these gods into obscurity, and I mean, obviously, it's hard to see what use they provide anymore.
Well, it's from a scientific point of view. I'm not a scientist, but I do enjoy reading the history of science and the philosophy of science. And from a scientific point of view, we often see that, at least what I think folks have seen and realized, is that we often initially devise answers, and those answers frequently include some motive power or active entity which later turns out to not actually be necessary, to not add anything. And a classic example of this was this idea of the phlogiston, which was this concept that was developed in 16 or 1700s, that the phlogiston was part of what made things burn. And it later realized that, no, there's no such thing as phlogiston, and we don't need it. It doesn't explain anything. Another classic in this arena was the concept of the ether. And the ether was what people thought was the medium through which actions occurred. And scientists eventually demonstrated that, no, there's no such thing as ether, and we don't need it anyway. And in a way, you take phlogiston, it's in the dust heap of history. I think Marx said that. It was probably one of the only good things that Marx said. Not Groucho Marx, he was a riot, but the other Marx, the other famous Marx. And you take phlogiston, you take ether. These are things that in fact, when science was applied, turned out to have no explanatory power, and not only be unnecessary, but not in any way helpful. And I think go ahead.
Even at a certain level, detrimental. I mean, let's just say it. Yeah. If we walk around with a certainty of what creates fire, saying phlogiston is what is responsible for fire, we instantly, once we know for a fact that that's what it is, we no longer test it. We no longer examine it. We no longer try to discover anything that's new about it. It's just, oh, that's what it is. We don't have to worry about it anymore. I would say that that's the most detrimental attribute of having these untestable beliefs, or just calling something, or just pulling a word out of the air like phlogiston and saying that that's what it is, because it doesn't have any actual help, any explanatory power. It's useless to us.
And it's worse than useless in a way. You're making a great point, and that segues over to, and I hope it's okay, we're sort of jumping back and forth here, but there's another idea. There's a way of thinking of faith. And there's a great phrase that I heard once. I think it was in the book, Peter Boghossian's book, The Manual for Creating Atheists. I think that's where I read this. But essentially it said, faith doesn't provide any of the answers. I'm paraphrasing it terribly. Faith doesn't provide answers. It just stops us from asking questions.
Yes, very, very much so. And I actually have yet to read Peter Boghossian's book. My reading materials have consisted of one topic lately. But yeah, I think that kind of harkens to a good point. It's about investigating what we don't actually, or what it's about challenging our conclusions, whether they're accurate or not.
Now, see, the religious person and the Mormon person, for an example, will say that you and I have stopped challenging our conclusions, and I think this is a problem that we have to be a little bit wary of. Is allowing the opposition, if we will, in a conversation about religion, to put the burden of proof on us. So as a free thinker, and I'm certainly quite willing and proud to say that I am an atheist. As an atheist, I commonly see in debates with theists, I see them putting the burden of proof onto the atheist. Essentially saying, well, if you can't prove that God doesn't exist, then God must exist. And that is a classic logical flaw, but it's a classic arguing error for us as the free thinker to allow the theist to make us prove a negative.
They're the ones. One of my favorite lines is just a Hitchens line saying that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. But I do agree that is a big problem. Often when you're having discussions with theists, is they shift the burden of proof, and instantly in their mind they no longer have to meet this certain level of proof that they are trying to attain. And we're the atheist standing there like, okay, well, you need to prove to me that some God, your personal theistic God exists, when the theist is just standing there saying, well, you need to disprove it. No, that's not how this works. You need to, if you're asserting that something exists, you need to have some sort of way to prove that it exists. Sorry, go ahead.
See, the thing is, though, you're totally right. The problem is, I'm sure, is maybe if all three listeners, maybe there's only two after listening to me for too long, they're thinking, that's true, but that's exactly where we are right now is this is an amazing time in human history that we can even say that, because apart from a number of atheists, right? And so there have been atheists all along, but until relatively recently, it was almost a form of social and maybe even real suicide to not simply take it as a given that the entire universe must have been created by God. Of course, this is the blind or the watchmaker fallacy writ large. But it's a wonderful thing that we actually are now at a point in time here in April of 2015 where we can say things like that without the burden of proof argument being flipped, saying, you're claiming there's no God. That's ridiculous. Just look outside the window. Obviously, there's a God. So you must prove there is no God.
Well, yeah, look
now
how beautiful the trees are, and how beautiful a bird is when it flies. I mean, obviously, it was designed, right? And there had to be some sort of logic behind it. I mean, well,
we're still constantly running into that. Constantly, you'll still hear that, even though it's been debunked 100 ways. But let me zoom back, if we could, just for a second, to I think a theme that's a resource that I've found to be very useful, even if just in sort of analyzing what I'm reading or what I'm hearing, and as you might have guessed, I've read a book or two just because they're all so fascinating. But the thing I'm aiming at here is by a guy named I think his name is Jesse Richardson. He's an Australian, and he put together this wonderful poster at yourlogicalfallacyis.com. And you can if you go to yourlogicalfallacyis.com, you can order this poster, and he'll ship you one. I think it's like $20 or something. But it's a very nice, like a 1.5 by 2.5 foot poster that has a set of the most common logical fallacies, about 20 of them, laid out in very nice grabby form. So what is the fallacy, a brief description of it, and a little more detail on it, and then an example of it.
That could be,
and it's a wonderful.
We should post that up in schools and county office buildings and stuff. I mean, having some sort of having like a measuring stick of what people use, or the logical fallacies that people are using. I think that's something that can be so beneficial, but it's something that isn't widely taught. It's not something that we ever talk about very often. It's just sort of something that people have only recently started talking about, is calling each other out on their logical fallacies, and saying shooting a dart and painting a circle or painting the target around it, or Texas sharpshooter fallacy. I mean, there's hundreds of these logical fallacies, and it's so useful to just look at an argument that somebody is using and say, this falls perfectly under the category of this fallacy, and this is why it's wrong. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to look that up. That sounds pretty beneficial. I might have to get a hold of one of those, put it up in my room or something.
It's a nice summary of the most common logical fallacies. And I guess the true expert debater is able to use a logical fallacy without it being obvious that their argument is fallacious. So, I hear religious people on this or that podcast, and they are constantly using logical fallacies, but never admitting to it. And it makes to the uncritical listener, it can sound very reasonable. And so I just appeal to the audience to study up on those a little bit. And be able to identify, the top 5 logical fallacies will really help you to see when one's being used on you, and also to be careful not to use one yourself. That's just something that I think can be helpful.
I would say I would just kind of bring that together by hearkening to a scathing atheist diatribe. I don't know if you're familiar with Scathing Atheist at all, but
I love it. Yeah, right. I got the book. I ordered the first volume.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually just got my copy of the first volume of Diatribes at ReasonCon and got it signed by all 3 members of it. I was losing my mind, right? So,
the fanboy there.
Right. Yeah, it was kind of nice. I got to admit, I kind of enjoyed it. Yep. But so yeah. Anyway, Noah talks about this was in like episode like 20s, 30s, something like that, talks about being an asshole. If you're going to be an asshole to somebody, you have to know more about the topic than the person that is asserting infactual claims knows about what they're talking about. So he's like talking about himself being the masked asshole because he seems to know so much more about what people are talking about. And when they're saying, I think he was talking about a buddy of his that was at a party, and this buddy was talking to a girl and telling her all about this new cleanse that he was on, and Noah just couldn't keep his mouth shut by that time. Because I mean, come on, going through a full body cleanse by drinking different chemicals mixed in water.
Ludicrous. It's completely ludicrous.
Exactly. It's so if you're going to take on the burden of arguing against people, against their logical fallacies, and actually calling them out, you have to know what the fuck you're doing. You have to understand what they have done. You have to understand the nuances of their argument and be able to identify what's wrong with it, and then be an asshole enough to call them out on it and make them look stupid. But if you don't know more about the topic than they do, they can turn it around on you, and they'd make you just look like a wrong asshole, and nobody benefits out of it.
Yeah, the challenge of that really is, I think it takes different kinds of people in, quote unquote, the movement. If I'm thinking of a free thought movement on a continuum from free thought over to and including atheists on one end, it's good to have some angry atheists, some scathing atheists, somebody like No Illusions. And I think recently he said what his actual name is, but it was just sort of a normal name, so I don't even remember it. But at the same time, in my experience, you can't really convince somebody, at least not in the moment you're talking to them. If you're going on full assault mode, pointing out all the absolutely idiotic things, and I could probably find myself on a 5-minute rant that if you could actually, quote unquote, cleanse your system, which isn't even a thing, doesn't even make sense, that if it were so easy to, quote unquote, cleanse the human system, we would have all died by now.
Right.
Because with the system, the body is designed, and there you go, design out there must be God, right?
Right.
The body has been designed by 2.5 billion years of development to achieve homeostasis and maintain homeostasis, which is to say, essentially an equilibrium across the system. And so whatever this cleanse is supposed to do, I mean, your body's just ignoring that. It's just flushing it out as fast as you pump it in. But if you don't say,
and you
if you go on the offensive, you just piss people off.
Right. And I mean, it might just like give you turkey squirts for a couple of days, and then you might feel better for a little while. But all you're doing is you're flushing beneficial microbes and a lot of biology out of your system that your body put in there for a reason. It's in your body for a reason. And if you're cleansing these things out of you, you're not going to be healthy after doing these, because that's stuff that you need to keep inside of you.
If you even could do those, that sort of stuff. A blog that I visit occasionally, it's referenced on the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, which is a wonderful podcast. Is the Science-Based Medicine podcast, and it's a great place to visit once in a while. And there's another podcast called Quackcast, I think Quackcast, or something close to that, by an infectious disease doctor, that are really good science heavy sources for some arguments that you can use. You can dial up the asshole or dial it down depending on your audience, but that you can use so that you can counteract some of these fanciful magical thinking kinds of concepts. One of the problems, though, when you think about being human, one of the benefits of being human, the way our brain essentially works, is we're still here. And like you said earlier, being too rational may actually not help. If you're stranded on a desert island, being super rational may put you into a depression you're never going to come out of. But having an irrational exuberance, to borrow from was it Volcker that said that, may be just what it takes to keep you alive long enough, for that ship to come. So it's an interesting paradox that if we were entirely rational, it may backfire.
Okay, but you have to also ask yourself, on a day-to-day basis, percentage-wise, how many of your days do you spend just existing in your everyday life, going to work, coming home, being with your family, versus how many days of your entire life you spend stranded on an island?
Yeah, this is a good point. Fortunately, the ratio is pretty good.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Absolutely, we can't look at everything with just a pure sheen of rationality without, without taking into consideration all the other possible consequences of the emotional side of decisions, or of the reptilian reaction to a situation that's going to happen. Okay, if a car, it happens to somebody's driving their car, they fall asleep at the wheel, whatever. You're walking down the street at the same time, wrong place at the wrong time. You see the car swerve or drift and start coming towards you. Is it better to say rationally, I wonder what's going on with that person? I mean, this seems like a very weird situation. I don't see this every day. Or is it better to just dive out of the way and fucking save your own life? So I get what you're saying, where treating everything with just rationality can get us a long ways, but we do have to supplement that with the instincts that we're inbred with what you said, 2.5 billion years of evolution.
Yeah, it's well, and we know it from any recent and even in the last decades ago, as you started to understand the way that the human brain works, and you've got down at the very bottom, right there at the top of the brain, at the top of the brainstem, you've got some of those very primitive elements like the amygdala that is the source of feeling of fear. So you feel fear when you see a snake, and I do a lot of trail running and ultra marathon trail running here in the Northern California, and I'll be out running on a trail in the nice hot afternoon, and I'll see the shape of a snake, and hearkening to your phrase, is sort of a Mormon phrase actually. Back to what we were saying earlier, you see the shape of a snake on a trail. You don't wait to figure out, is that really a snake? I find myself jumping up in the air to try to get over it or around it before even really logically saying, oh, you know what, that's not a snake, that's a stick, right? The brain is wired in such a way that, right, we have those fear responses first, and then the fight or flight, and first it's flight, and then next one you can override that.
And let's just say, because all of our ancestors that didn't have a strong sense of that fight or flight died before they reproduced. That's pretty simple.
It could be the case. There's another thing that phrase that I use with my wife occasionally. We have a fun phrase, actually. We say, often wrong, seldom in doubt. And usually I'm the one that's wrong, but not in doubt. But occasionally she actually is wrong. But I think, as one of the things that humans like to be is sure of ourselves, right? So in general, we like to be confident that what we're doing makes sense. And so we'll pick a path, I think, and then frequently find evidence that reinforces that we're doing the right thing. And of course, this is just a classic case of confirmation bias. Is the phrase that kind of captures that. So if you look on Wikipedia under confirmation bias, it's a wonderful wealth of knowledge about what confirmation bias is and how it's important to be aware of it.
And the Iron Chariots article about that is also pretty interesting as well. The Matt Dillahunty's diatribe against confirmation bias, it's pretty impressive.
I got to read it. I love that Iron Chariots. It's such a great asset. And one of the things that's so cool about like a conversation like this is, if I had heard this conversation when I was 14 years old, right, which would have been difficult because that would have been like 1977, before the internet or anything. But if I'd heard a conversation like this on my smartphone, which didn't exist, I think I would have never stayed in the Mormon church as long as I did. But there was nowhere to turn.
Yeah,
nowhere to turn for this kind of, I didn't have any way to escape from the little bubble that had been built, and that I've been put in, because the internet, it's pretty tacky now to say it, but the internet, I think, really does change everything.
Yeah, and I mean, let's just say it. People say this all the time, and it can't be said enough. I think the internet will be the death of religion, either as a whole or of just certain more fallacious religions that are easier to point out, like Mormonism, like Scientology. We can look back and see these people in relatively recently recorded history. We can see the kind of people that they actually were, and it's easy to construct a model that fits, a worldview model that fits of why these people did what they did. I mean, let's face it, Joseph Smith, he liked his women, and he liked to be an
he liked his friends' women too.
Exactly. He liked all the women. He wanted all of them.
You're correct.
So yeah, I mean, he obviously did this for a reason, and it worked, because now he's revered by, the church boasts 15 million people as being the first true prophet and seer and revelator since Jesus came down to establish the true church of Jesus Christ. So it's just I don't know. I just find it fascinating if we can use the internet as this amazing tool to try and, well, basically, let's just say it. Let's put down religion while it's in its death throes and lashing out. Let's just use the internet to crush it the rest of the way. So,
well, the thing is, I am generally optimistic that the web will not defeat, because that's not the right word. It's not really, we're not in a battle with religion. I think what we're in is that we're in a battle with superstition. We're in a battle with irrationality. We're in a battle with all of these logical fallacies. And these things are not without harm. You know, I think, like, if I were to ask my mother, you know, she'd probably be mortified by our conversation. And she'd say, well, you know, even if Mormonism isn't true, there's still a great benefit in being a member in this church. And I think, you know, that unfortunately on balance is not an accurate statement. I think that the religion in general and Mormonism in particular, since we're talking, you know, your podcast is focused on early Mormonism, that it really has many terrible side effects. And you know, from the sexism, you know, the racism. Oh my goodness! You know, when David Michael read the Book of Mormon, I read it with him. You know, I read it a long time ago, many times. But in the last 2 years, I've read it, or however long. It seems like it's been 2 years. Probably hasn't been that long.
And
I've read it with him.
The current tamed down version of it.
Boy,
he's not reading the original form, which is way more offensive.
Oh, it's the sexism, the racism, the anti-intellectualism. It's just terrible. And even when I say anti-intellectualism, easy for me to say, right? The Mormon will say that they are highly intellectual. And Joseph Smith he said, go learn stuff. It's great. Go learn stuff. But he didn't really mean it.
Yeah. And that's why they're trying to discourage having group Book of Mormon studies, because people can study it together, take turns reading verses, and then they begin to see that you kind of, it depends on the group, I guess I should say. You either get locked into the herd mentality of, okay, this is true, this is accurate, what we're reading is just scripture. That's, like all believing members do. That's what I did for 17 years. That's what you did for 21 years, right?
Yeah.
So, you can get into that circle.
The echo chamber is what it is.
The echo chamber, yes, perfect way to say it. Or you can get into this camp of having one person that is in the group that's the devil's advocate, or having just a couple of people in the group that are skeptical enough of what they're reading that they say, what does that say? Hang on, that doesn't make sense. Hey, let's Google that real quick. And I think that right there is going to be the death of all Mormonism, is reading the Book of Mormon in study and then saying, let's Google what it just claimed, because that doesn't seem to make sense, or that doesn't seem historically accurate.
Well, one great a resource I found some years ago is a Wikipedia page called Anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, which maybe you've seen, and it's a nice one. It captures like the top 20, and then actually allows FAIR to respond, or Farms or FAIR, either one of them, to respond, and then further responds to their response. So Anachronisms in the Book of Mormon is one, and then there's the famous, and you probably maybe even met the guy, right? The CES letter.
I would love to meet that guy. Absolutely. I read it, and it's that's actually kind of
devastating.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. There's so much information there, and the entire premise of why the guy sent the letter was he got back from his mission, right? And he started doing some research, and then just decided to write his CES director and say, hey, these are some problems that I have with the church. This is why I left. And now it's become this go-to source for anybody that wants to learn about, a concise view of Mormon history and Mormon contradictions, just in one small location, one small resource. And I loved it, actually. It's a really great letter. It's well said. It's very poignant. It's not attacking. It's just all factual based, and that's what I'm all about. It's just all about the facts. And so I kind of wanted to let's dive a little bit deeper here, and let's kind of get into you, Jay. So
my favorite topic.
Right, exactly. So,
I'm an expert on my own opinion.
Good. I would hope that there's nobody else that is as much of an expert on yourself as you. So you got back from your mission, and you decided that it was bunk at that time. So you had kind of reasoned yourself out of it. Was it just your world traveling that had gotten you exposed to other cultures that made you realize that it was crazy? Or did you start hearing things that didn't make sense and start researching them? Or what kind of led? What was the catalyst? That's what I want to get at.
Yeah, in a way, one problem is that particular transition was so long ago that I have, and I think it not just by accident, I've pushed some of that out of my memory to a degree. But I've been thinking about this recently. I came back from my mission. It was really, from the point of view of a rah-rah Mormon mission, it was just absolutely terrible, right? You go to Taiwan, try to learn Chinese first off. Oh, that's not easy.
No.
Right?
Was it
go
Mandarin
to Taiwan.
Chinese?
Yeah, Mandarin Chinese.
Oh, wow.
Which was wonderful. I mean, it's been helpful to me to be able to speak Mandarin Chinese. I'm not going to say that's not a bad thing.
Well, I mean, when a fifth of the planet's population speaks that language, it's kind of useful to have.
It's a good thing, right?
It's more useful than I would say Spanish is, because just by sheer numbers of people that you
either one of those would be very useful, locally Spanish, but when I went there, and it was I'm not sure why, I just got fed up with going to church. I was so sick and tired of church. And when I came back from my mission, I remember that I had gone on my mission from a University of Utah ward. So I was a college student for 2 years, and then I went on my mission in the fall of '83. I went to the MTC. I had Mandarin, so I had fun learning Chinese. I like to learn stuff. I mean, I enjoy learning new things, and it was complicated and interesting, and there was a lot of history, so that was fun. But the mission, in terms of being a faith-affirming exercise, was really just a catastrophe. And so when I came back to a U of U ward, University of Utah ward. But I didn't know anybody, because all the students leave, right? They've moved on. And so I remember my RM speech, right? When you go on a mission in the Mormon church and you come back, then you are an RM, a returned missionary, and you give a speech, and you probably already know this, and you give that speech, when you on that first Sunday back.
Oh, yeah, your homecoming speech. Yep, I've been to many of those.
So I don't remember. I don't have any video. I wish I did. I don't have any video of that. But I gave that speech, and it wasn't to anybody I knew. I mean, there were some people from my family that were there, because I have a lot of family in Utah, northern Utah. And I remember, as I said earlier, after that day, I have never gone back to Mormon church, or really any other church, other than for sort of historical interest in the sociology of belief.
So it was you were like literally fresh off of the plane, and
right off the plane.
Had you decided on your mission that it wasn't true, or were you just kind of like in a state of mind that I'm done with it, I'm over it, it's boring to me, I just don't want to deal with it? Or
I was tired of it. Okay. I was tired of it. I don't think I had. I cannot honestly say that in 1986 I had anywhere near the skeptical, analytical, data-supported, historically supported opinions that I have now. That Mormonism is a complete, 99% of it is hogwash as a doctrine in the Book of Mormon, and in the Book of Abraham. Let's not even start talking about that. I didn't have any of that. Of course, nobody had, I shouldn't say nobody, but almost nobody had any of that in 1985. Mm-hmm. If somebody had found a copy of Fawn Brody's No Man Knows My History and read it, that came out like in 43 or 44. I never heard of that book. There was no way to find any of that stuff unless a friend gave it to you, and then it would have been sort of, here, this is a secret book. Don't let anybody see that you have it.
It's like worse than porn.
Yeah, much worse. Much worse than porn. And so I didn't have a falling away that was driven by external information. I just remember it more being I was just tuckered out of going to church. I was just plumb tired of it. And so then it was really over the next from 85 to about 95, I gradually became less and less identified myself as being a Mormon. I went after 2 more years at university. I graduated, and I was an active duty Army officer for 4 years, from 87 to 91, including Gulf War number 1. And I recall during that period, I did not go to a Mormon church. My dog tags said, since I don't remember the exact phrase, but basically it's like no religion.
No kidding.
Is what I had on my dog tags.
You were
I remember
a nun
that
at that point.
A nun, yeah. I don't think we called it a nun yet, but that's what it was. That's what I was. And I recalled, so in that period, I had drifted, or whatever the right word is, away from the Mormon church. But at some level, I always still identified with the Mormon church. There's probably a lot of people, even right now, sort of like this. They don't go to church anymore. They don't really think of themselves as Mormon. But for me, because my parents were still so active and are even today, and my 2 brothers and their families, what it meant to me was when the Mormon church got involved in something embarrassing, like they did something especially stupid, or a Mormon person did something particularly ridiculous, I felt embarrassed. And I'm not even thinking of myself, this is some sort of subconscious identification that I had with Mormonism. Even though I hadn't gone to church in, a year, a month, a year, or 5 years, I would still feel bad that, Mormons were being portrayed in a negative light. Even in 2008, when Mitt Romney was running for president, I still felt a little bit that, when somebody would make fun of him for being a Mormon, as though Mormonism is silly and say Judaism is not, in terms of the biblical claims, I still would feel a little bit bad. But now I don't feel bad at all. I'm like, okay, that is completely in my past.
Well,
so yeah,
I kind of want to point to what you experienced is what the church has recently kind of they've tried to put a lid on a little bit by changing the missionary age by 1 year.
Yeah.
And I
heard about that.
That's very, very important. What they did, so for anybody that doesn't know, the Mormon missionary age is 19 years old. So before they changed it, so a young man would become an elder. He would have this 1 year hiatus, kind of, or you could almost call it like a rumspringen, right? He would he would not know if he wanted to go to school for a year and then quit and then go on his mission, or if he just wanted to work for a year and save up for the mission or whatever. So it was kind of like this weird limbo time that a lot of these prospective missionaries would go to a year of college, get exposed to the world outside of Mormonism, realize that it's all bullshit, and then they would leave before they go on their mission. So just in 2012, maybe 11, was it? It
was recent.
Yeah, very, very recently. They switched the missionary age for males from 19 to 18. So as soon as you graduate high school, you don't get to leave the bubble. You just get pushed right out on the mission, just fresh out of high school. And I think that's kind of what it was an effort to do, was to curb these people that would go out and learn about the church and understand that, or they would be sick of church and then just kind of like you were, and then they would leave and just never go back once they went to college. So
I that makes sense that it could have that's something to do. I mean, in a way, it's one of many semi-desperate things. And I think what we'll see, just as a quick aside, I think we'll see over the next 1 to 10 years, we're going to see more and more desperate behavior, by the organization.
And that's kind of what when I was saying that the church seems like it's kind of in its death throes and it's lashing out. It seems to be doing these desperate measures that, it's still a very healthy, thriving religion, but they boast a membership of 15 million people with an active membership of barely over 4 million.
Who believes? Yeah, I don't think anybody believes. And that's a problem that we see throughout society, is once you've told so many lies, that even when you're telling the truth, people don't believe you.
Exactly.
I think that's pretty close to where many organizations, get, for better or worse. So as I coming back to the early 90s. Oh boy, doesn't that sound deathly boring?
Back to my birth year.
Yeah, so a long ago. So I'm thinking back to in the early 90s, I was an Army officer till 91. Then I went to grad school, and I went back to Utah. I went to the University of Utah for grad school, in part because it was a good school, and the University of Utah is very different from BYU or one of these much more closed environments. I mean, U of U is, in a way, it's a counterpoint to BYU. It's almost riotously un-Mormon.
Right. It's seen as the outsider school. I mean, you have Utah State University in Logan, right? And it's known as like being the most insular mountain town school college ever of like Mormon fundamentalism. And then you have BYU, which is the church-owned college that's in Provo, or church-owned university. I should make that distinction. University that's in Provo, and let's say Orem and Provo area, the Mormon per capita ratio there is astronomically higher than it is in Salt Lake. Because Salt Lake is the central hub of rationality, and Utah, or University of Utah, is just in the middle, in the heart of Salt Lake City, just east of downtown Salt Lake, and that's kind of where that's where the apostates go, or people that couldn't get into BYU. That's kind of where they go.
So I didn't know it was possible to not. Okay, I'm not going to make. I didn't know it was possible to not be able to get into BYU. I mean, if you can open your Doctrine and Covenants to, you name it. Now that's kind of cold, but no, I got to take a shot at those guys occasionally.
Feel free. It's this gridiron holy war that's been going for years and years. So it's all.
It has been. Okay. It has been for a while.
I wanted to ask you, going back a decade there, you were alive and in the Mormon Church during the transition of blacks not having priesthood to them having priesthood in 1979, correct?
Right. I was 16.
What did you think about that?
I don't think I thought about it very much. I was living in the bubble, right? And at that particular time, it would have been when we lived in North Carolina, actually. North Carolina. We lived in North Carolina from 76 to 79, I think it was, and then moved to Rhode Island. And so I remember that the high school I went to, for the first 2 years, I went to one school, and it wasn't particularly integrated. It was a school, high school on the post, on the campus of the Fayetteville Army base, right? And then the second 2 years of the first 2 years I went to the integrated school. My middle school was not integrated particularly. And I just remember in my high school, first 2 years in high school, it was that integrated school. But, we were not in Utah. So we were still the chosen people, and the peculiar people, one Mormon to, 99 Baptists. And I was, as a 16, 15-year-old, I wasn't really thinking about race issues vis-a-vis the priesthood really very much. I don't know if I even would have been particularly aware that they didn't have, that the church had that racist policy. So the transition that for me I was much more aware of was, in fact, essentially one that's in the last 10 years, and that was the Prop 8 in California.
Okay, so were you living in California at that time when it was going?
Yeah, I've lived in California since '93.
Oh, okay. So was it kind of the buzz where a lot of people there talking about it? Hey, the church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints just funneled $60 million into this campaign. What do you think about that? I mean, was it kind of the buzz, or did anybody even know?
Yeah, I think that people had some idea of that. But this is one of those examples of where the church had just scarred me so deeply, and I didn't even really notice it. I didn't realize it until Prop 8, and then it came into focus. And that is that as a Mormon, and anybody that reads Deuteronomy 21 and actually reads it, the bit that says kill all the gay people, And then it's in Acts as well. Christians can't just claim, oh, that's some Old Testament thing. It's right smack in the middle of the New Testament too, people. Stop denying it.
In Romans too, if I'm not mistaken, right? Romans 1.
Yeah, I think it is there as well.
Yeah.
As a Mormon, homosexuality is sin. And that's what I always thought. And I didn't think very critically about it, even though I live in the Bay Area, which is, 20 miles from San Francisco. I still had this idea in my head, which was planted, and I wasn't smart enough or aware enough or strong enough to root it out in 2008. And so I was never not terribly at the time. I didn't think anything of voting for Prop 8. Now, Prop 8 was a law to, or voting against Prop 8 was the law to make gay marriage legal, essentially. And I, as a grown up, an adult in California, I had the vote, and I obviously do, and so I voted against it. I don't think that I knew that the Mormon Church was putting money against it. I voted against it more as sort of reflexive response to that first 25 years of indoctrination that I had not yet in 2008 or so, 2007, 2008, that I had not yet just really I zeroed in on, isolated, and become disgusted by. And so I voted against Prop 8. And I know it's because I just didn't think critically about what the Mormon Church was teaching me way back, when I was a kid.
That I find that so fascinating that you had been out of the church for well over 20 years. 23 years. It's something you just had you just not taken the extra time and thought processes to skeptically criticize why you had that anti-gay conviction at the time? Or I guess you said it perfectly. It was just a reflexive action. It's what you had been taught so long.
Yeah, I just I didn't isolate that thing, that virus. I didn't isolate it and then look straight at it and say, this is anti-humanist. This is bullshit. This is wrong. I didn't do that. And so that vestige, of the chicken pox, if a person had smallpox when they were young and they've got the scars, for the rest of their life, I had not looked that square in the face and said, this mentality is indefensible, it's disgusting, and it's wrong. People are people, and we need to stop these sorts of discriminatory tactics. And so, in fact, in a way, it was my daughter, who's she's a college student now. She's 19. My daughter didn't exactly ask me, "Hey, Dad, how did you vote on Prop 8?" She didn't exactly ask me that, but I could tell from her perspective. And so she was born in 95. So during Prop 8, she's like 13, right? In 2008, she's 13, 14 years old, and a California kid grew up in this free-thinking environment. She saw Prop 8 as just ridiculous, to prohibit people from being able to get married because of some thing from Deuteronomy. That's just ridiculous, Dad.
So at this point, did you come to the realization that your 13-year-old daughter was more rational than you at that point? Did that actually hit you at any time?
I think I was embarrassed I didn't phrase that right. This is a soundbite that I'm not saying well. I didn't think of it that way. What I realized was my daughter was not polluted. She was not taught bigotry. She was not taught discrimination. She was not taught hate. And so she did not have bigotry in her way of thinking. She did not have hate in her way of thinking. She did not have discrimination in her way of thinking. So she was free of it.
Do you attribute that to a generational gap, or to just the environment she grew up in? Or did you kind of raise her? Did you raise the family secular? Or
yeah, oh yeah,
okay,
yeah, absolutely. So her, she almost occasionally says, "Oh, Dad, please stop talking about atheism." So my goal with my wife and my goal with was, it was to try to teach her how to think, not what to think, that's easy to say. It's kind of hard to do, because I would also want to say, okay, kid, here, think about these are called logical fallacies. And she's like, Dad, I'm 12. What are you telling me about logical fallacies? Right? Nobody talks like that. That's what would love to say to me. Nobody talks like that, Dad. So I would talk to her about a logical fallacy or the no true Scotsman fallacy. She said, Dad, nobody talks like that. But she definitely grew up in a secular, free-thinking, rationalist, humanist household. But underneath the covers, beneath the waves, I still had these various Loch Ness monsters swimming around down there that were planted back in the 60s and 70s, and reinforced and learned, in however many Super Saturdays or mutual, whatever the heck those things were called, or that I had been to in all those many years. And so when 2008 came along and Prop 8, I didn't really care the Mormons were for it or against it. I was against it based on that initial indoctrinated bigotry. And once the vote went through, and then I also started to learn more about the way my own daughter thought about this. I said, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. I'm still trapped by this collection of hogwash. I have to escape from it. And that was kind of the last big thing I had to escape from, that Mormonism was, where it had wrapped its tendrils around me.
Can I share with you that was your most recent experience with it that you can vividly recall? Can I share with you my first experience that I recall with that?
Sure.
So this was when I was, I believe, a junior in high school, and I was talking with my buddy about abortion, right? The big bad A word. And I hadn't really examined it up to this point about my opinion of it. I just kind of had this this overarching kind of not really a nuanced view of abortion is bad. It's baby murder, right? And my buddy, he and I became friends in 5th grade. He was a convert to the church, and he's pretty agnostic now, which is pretty awesome. He didn't go on a mission or anything. And so we were having this discussion, and he said, why would you care if somebody decides to get an abortion? It doesn't affect you if they get it? And
right.
that was the one line that I was like, oh, holy shit, he's right. Why would it bother me if somebody gets an abortion? And that's kind of something that I've applied to like a lot of my political stances is, if somebody does this, how is it going to affect me? So if somebody wants to get, if somebody wants to have a gay marriage or be in a lifetime partnership with their
Sure.
partner that they love, who am I to stop them from getting what they want in life? I mean, I shouldn't be able to vote against their level of satisfaction with their own lives. That seems wrong. And that was the first time that I really, really put this test on it of why would I care? It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, I like that. You didn't know you were such a libertarian, did you?
I had no idea. Yeah.
Essentially, that's what libertarian believe. To a certain degree, what consenting adults do is their own business, unless there's a demonstrable harm, and there really is no demonstrable harm. And it was just last week, I think, or was it on Tuesday, that the Supremes heard the current set of cases. So we'll probably have this issue, resolved, just hopefully not the same way that Roe v. Wade resolved abortion. Here we are 50 years later, still fighting that fight. Mm-hmm. But it is a good question that you asked yourself, why should I care? But I would take it one step a little bit even further. So that's sort of a minimalist approach that will helps you avoid sticking your nose in things that you really don't have any right to stick your nose in.
Yeah, and being a teenager, that's all that I was. I mean, let's face it, teenagers are narcissistic by nature, that they're discovering themselves, they're learning the world around them. And that was what made sense to me in my teenage mind. It was like, the only thing that I really focus on very much is just me and what is my opinion about it. And you're right, it was kind of a minimalist approach, but it was like, I'm not bothered by it, so why should anybody else be bothered by it? And it was kind of like this leading to a point of rationality, even if I kind of got there by incorrect means.
Well, it's not an incorrect means. I mean, I think that puts you walking on the road in the correct direction. And in a way, it's like there's a lot of things about in the free thinking or even the humanist or atheist space where you're going in the right direction, but in reality, you could go even faster in the right direction when you set aside these moral precepts, that many of which are misrepresented versions of moral precepts, cherry-picked versions of moral precepts that were established in the Stone Age.
Exactly. By
you're talking about the Stone Age, people. You're killing me here with this Ten Commandments. Which of the three versions of the Ten Commandments are you referring to, sir?
Are you talking the first version in Numbers of the 9 Commandments, or are you talking in Judges with the 11 Commandments? Or what exactly are you talking here?
Yeah, they don't even know. They don't, and this blanket they often, when I get into if I have the opportunity, which I don't very often, because I'm not as good as Peter Boghossian at bringing this stuff up all the time. Mm-hmm. But if you get into a conversation with many theists, what I find is they don't even know what they believe. Mm-hmm. They really don't know. They do not know, but here's the fundamental problem, Mr. Bryce. I have oftentimes they don't care. So I have a wonderful friend for 20 years plus now. A very nice man. He's a wonderful, outgoing, friends everywhere. He's Jewish, and when we talk about the Old Testament, and I say, look at the Old Testament, look at the God of the Old Testament. He's a murdering, raping, maniac. He gives instructions on genocide, infanticide, human sacrifice.
And when people don't carry out those orders, he annihilates them, or he banishes them, or kills them in a very violent manner, or curses them, or if you don't play by Yahweh's rules, you kind of get a fucking by Yahweh.
Little kids make fun of a bald guy, so naturally she bears will come out and maul 40 of them. Well, why not? That's totally reasonable. This is what your God is all about, my friend. Don't you care? No, I don't really care. Yeah, and he doesn't care.
That's something that I kind of get frustrated with. This was actually a recent debate or not a debate, but a discussion that I had with a family member. They asked that quintessential question. Well, where do you get your morality from?
Sure.
And I just kind of threw it back. I get it from where do you get your morality from? And the single line that they said was the 10 Commandments. And at that point, I proceeded to try and deconstruct the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, set, match.
Yeah, so, you have the 10 Commandments. 3 of them are about a God being a jealous individual. One of them is about not making any statues, and it can be interpreted, never writing anything down, because engraven images can be interpreted as writing.
So a picture. Mm-hmm. Crazy.
Or any pictures or whatever, and that's what Muslims use as their justification for killing people that draw pictures of, like Charlie Hebdo did, right?
And I don't think that's even in the Quran, actually.
No.
That particular prohibition.
Islam is based off of Judaism, and Christianity. It's a Judeo-Christian addition, much like Mormonism is. It's just some dude came along and decided that he wanted to add on to the existing doctrines, and that's what he focused on certain things more than others, and that was one of them, was in these engraven images. So you have that, and then you have honor your parents. Well, what if your parents are assholes, right? What if your parents are drug addicts and not worth honoring? What if they're people that are abusing you constantly? Okay, that doesn't sound like a good idea to honor them in that case. It sounds like a situation you should probably get the fuck out of. And thou shalt not kill, that sounds really good, but what if somebody's trying to kill you?
It doesn't actually say thou shalt not kill. The phrase apparently is thou shalt not murder or kill without just cause. So it's not even thou shalt.
And that is made abundantly clear by Yahweh commanding
constantly
this horde of Israelite tribe to go into these various cities, the Midianites, the Canaanites, the Amalekites, and just slaughter everybody. There was no justification for it other than these people are on your promised land, and I promised it to you, so go take the land from them. So
Well,
thou
and it
shalt not
goes.
kill gets thrown out of the window, no matter
Oh,
how
absolutely.
nuanced it is.
Well, and not even, and we don't even need to go into the story of Noah, which is just ridiculous on every single level.
Absolutely. And it was Noah's,
ridiculous.
yeah, and it was Noah's, great-grandson Moses that initially introduced these doctrines, or these 10 commandments, as being written by the hand of God. And in 2 paragraphs, you and I have been, in 2 minutes of conversation, you and I have been able to completely deconstruct 8 of the 10 commandments. Just by simple rationality. Is that really? And I mean, obviously, we are more moral. We can come up with much better moral convictions to hold to than anybody that believes in this deity of Yahweh.
Yeah. Well, David Smalley has always does a good job with this question of where does morality come from, and the way he brings it back around. And you might have heard him recently on some of the in-depth podcasts that he's been doing on Dogma Debate. Is essentially the God of the Old Testament is not only not remotely worthy of worship, he has a far lower moral standard than any of us does.
Yeah, I think Matt Dillahunty brings that in as well. He does a really, really good job of saying, well, I am a more moral being than your God is. And then he addresses at the same time Pascal's wager by saying, if this God does exist, I'm going to stand in front of him in my judgment day and say, hey, why were you such an asshole? You have a lot to answer to us for your
seriously
actions. And he's like, and I have no problem frying in hell knowing that I'm more moral than the being that put me there. And that just seems like such a knockdown conclusion argument against it, and something that a lot of believers don't want to hear.
Well, the escape valve is always, though, that some variation of God works in mysterious ways, or it's the sister corollary, which is God's ways are above our ways, so we can't understand God. So anytime that you come to a logical non sequitur, Mr. Bryce, you are obviously just not able to understand what God really means. So, and there's no way out of that. There's no way that you and I can argue back against somebody who says, well, I understand that you've completely demolished my argument on all levels, historical, sociological, and linguistic, but that's okay because God works in mysterious ways. That's the end of the conversation, right? There's no way to respond to that.
I disagree with you, actually, because one of my favorite diatribes on Scathing Atheist was when Noah did talk about God working in mysterious ways.
I have to find it.
I can't remember. It was after episode 50. I think it was somewhere in the 70s or 80s.
Okay.
He started off by making this analogy to gravity. How do you know that gravity exists as, being analogous to how do you know God exists? Well, we can measure the effects of gravity. We can drop something, we can drop a spoon and it falls to the earth, but we've never been able to measure a gravity. We've never been able to put a gravity under the microscope and look at it. We don't even know how the spoon knows that there's an earth beneath it to fall towards. So we're able to measure the effects of something that exists, even if it is ill-defined and we aren't exactly sure what the cause of it is. But if we look back, if we consider all of scientific inquiry, theological philosophy has existed for, let's just say, probably hundreds of thousands of years. Homo sapien has been, and all of our hominid ancestors have been making up some kind of God to explain what is going on, or some kind of force, some kind of deity to explain what's going on. However, in 300 years of the scientific method, we've come up, we're going to the heavens and we're taking pictures of them, of things that are 13 billion light years away. We're making all these fantastic medical advancements and eradicating sickness, and we're able to vaccinate our entire race away from having certain sicknesses. And we're able to do all of these things because we've come up with this proper way of measuring and explaining our world. The problem is, if we try and factor in a God or the effects of a God into any of the equations that we use for measuring reality, it instantly, there's no place for it. We can't exactly enter in the variable g into the fundamental gravity equation, Fg equals m1 times m2 over g squared or r squared, right? We can't factor in the variable of God anywhere. So when you're talking about God and how God works in a mysterious way, it's not that he works in mysterious ways, it's that he works in ways that are consistent or perfectly consistent with not existing,
not working at all.
Exactly. So that's the kind of the way that he deconstructed on that diatribe, and that was one of those at the end of it. I was like, I gotta rewind that shit. I gotta listen to that like 6 more times so I get in everything about that, because that is a knockdown, drag out argument for the divine hiddenness and mysteriousness of God.
Yeah, see, the only problem, Bryce, is you've forgotten Psalms. I'm just looking up here. I knew it. I just need to look up the reference, 14:1.
Oh, God, here we go.
Which is where the fool says in his heart, there is no God. So therefore, you're wrong. I don't care. No matter what all the things you just said, I don't care. You're just wrong. But you know what? The good news about this kind of thing is, I think when you're talking face to face to somebody, let's say that you've just made those arguments to me as a theist, it's essentially against the basic tenets of human nature for me to suddenly say, wow, Bryce, you know what? My whole life I've been just completely wrong. And now I see that. Nobody will ever do that. I shouldn't say no one ever, but boy, it's going to be very, very unlikely. But tonight, tomorrow afternoon, while I'm waiting for that green light, I think, man, Bryce said some pretty sensible things there. And essentially, all I could say is nah. And I'm not in kindergarten anymore. So when we make those kinds of arguments, and I don't want to sound too pessimistic, when we make these kinds of arguments that are reasonable, they're based in logic. And from a point of view of logic, they're undeniably logical. And all that the theist can do is essentially say, well, God's ways are above our ways, so we can't understand it. Yeah, and you reply, yeah, that's okay, but when you go visit your mother over the weekend, you'll fly in an airplane that's floating through the sky at 30,000 feet, and it doesn't take God to make it stay up there.
Right. I mean, quite
those
honestly,
people they can come around someday if they choose to.
And I think that is kind of like you said earlier, you kind of have to pick your audience. You have to decide what is the context in which you're providing this argument against the theist, right? So you in like a debate format where it's all about having these knockout arguments that are logically sound. You're not trying to convince the person that you're debating. You're trying to convince the spectators. Whereas like a one-on-one conversation with somebody, I would never be that assertive about an argument, about my point of an argument. I would always try and reason the person there. I would ask the proper questions to get them to the point where they fall into line with my reasoning. And that's like you said, that's a Peter Boghossian way to do it. Just
the Socratic method, right? Is what it's often referred to. Just keep asking. Help me understand why you think that. Help me understand the basis for that observation, right? Those kinds of things. I think those are more likely to be successful in the long run. I hear various podcasts, and when I'm running or walking, I like to go. There's a particular 18-mile loop that I like to walk near my house. Well, it's not that near when I'm on the far end of the loop, but on weekends sometimes I'll walk along the trail here in the Contra Costa County, and I walk about 8 miles to In-N-Out Burger, which is the greatest of all burger places. I eat lunch, and then I walk back on the trail on the west side of the valley, and I listen to podcasts, and I read my books on my Paperwhite on my Kindle as I'm walking along. And I've heard quite a few podcasts in the last 3 or 4 months, in the sort of the universe, the skeptical universe of podcasts of people being interviewed who said, I was a staunch theist, essentially right until the minute I wasn't anymore. And what triggered that, the house of cards to collapse, was often it was just a sort of drumbeat of rational questions being put to them in a respectful manner. And suddenly the dam bursts and they think, wait a minute, none of this makes any sense. It never made any sense. And I can't fake this anymore. And I just have heard a number of those kinds of stories recently.
And I think that's really accurate to a lot of people's convictions. So let me just go on a personal note real quick. I'll probably cut this out of here because it's about a personal family member. But
Sure.
so my dad and I have gone through various correspondence. Right, my dad was in the bishopric 2 years ago. And I started, when I moved away from Utah, I moved over to Colorado, I started talking to my theist buddy. You probably listened to the debate, Jesse.
Yeah, I did.
I mean, you gave me critique on it. What am I talking about? Yeah. So,
oh, no, that's fine.
So I started talking with Jesse, and he turned me on to this. He told me, or we talked about Mormonism being Christianity versus being Mormonism. And
okay.
I was arguing, just like all Mormons and ex-Mormons do, that Mormonism is Christianity. And he said, no, it's not. It's very contradictory towards or against biblical Christianity. I'm like, well, whatever. Dude, Jesus Christ is in the name. Come on, they're fucking Christians, dude.
Yeah, really.
And I didn't realize that there's so much more nuance to it. So he told me about this TV show called Heart of the Matter. And I don't know if you've heard of it or if you're at all, if you know.
No, I haven't.
Okay, so it's this guy that grew up in the church until I think he got out at age 38 or something, became this born-again Christian.
Oh, great, wonderful.
Doing a bunch of research about the church. And so he teamed up with Sandra Tanner of UTLM. Are you familiar with that at all?
I've heard of her. Yeah, I've heard of her.
Sandra and Gerald Tanner. And Gerald died, I think, like 6 years ago or something. But those two are kind of like the leading Mormon scholars. They have done a ton of independent research, and everything is all on utlm.org. That's one of my main sources of information that I use.
Okay, cool.
And it's all extremely well documented. Sandra even met with Mark Hoffman in his prison. Like, do you know the whole thing?
Yeah, I know. But I know something about the bomb and the forgeries that even the freaking prophet couldn't tell was a forgery.
Yeah, and this dude sold $900,000 worth of forgeries to the church, right?
Jeez.
So yeah, fucking genius, right? So
seriously.
Sandra actually met with him to talk to him about like the salamander letter that he fabricated. And I mean, it's a really, really awesome website. It's kind of cumbersome. It's all a lot of text, really, really, really big web pages. With tons and tons of text, and they pretty much just take a single argument and completely deconstruct it. So I started watching this TV show called Heart of the Matter, and it was just biblical Christianity versus Mormonism and an examination of Mormon history. And that's when I started understanding that, oh shit, Mormonism is nothing like Christianity. I need to find out what's true. And that's kind of what led me on my journey to atheism, right?
Okay.
In this about 2 years ago when I started doing this and doing all this research, I had a little bit of email correspondence with my dad, and I did you hear a quote that I read that from Joseph Smith? He says, "I have more to boast of than any man ever had, more than Jesus."
Yeah.
More okay.
Sure, that's in No Man Knows My History too. I think she quotes that.
I believe it. That's where the primary source for it is, that most people.
It's like when he was running for president, wasn't it? Kind of later.
No, this was. I think it was in light of one of his arrests, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
It was after he had escaped from being arrested once.
Okay.
So I had heard this quote, and it blew my fucking mind. I had no idea that Joseph was such a douchebag, right? So this one time when I was visiting home, just after 8 or so months after I had moved away, I got in a little bit of a discussion with both of my parents, and I brought up that quote, and I challenged my parents down to the point of saying, does this sound like a Christ-like man? Somebody that would say that he has more to boast of than Jesus did. Does this sound like a Christ-like man? And I just they would deflect, and then I would reason them around, and then I would hit them with the same question again. Does this sound like a Christ-like man? And this was when I was kind of flirting with the idea of being a Christian. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be or what was true. And I mean, I was still in the middle of my journey. So this spurred a little bit of email correspondence. I mean, just 2 emails back and forth between my dad and I. And I sent him a link to a couple of these episodes that were really, really damning. That were a couple of my favorite episodes. And it was kind of silence for a while after that. And
Yeah.
I didn't get anything back from him, no email, no nothing, no phone call, nothing. It was just dead silence after I sent that email. And I came to find out that my dad had this massive meltdown crisis of faith. He asked to be released from the bishopric.
Wow.
He had a huge, like his whole world melted down because he did a little bit of research and it freaked him out.
I bet.
So I only found this out like 3 or 4 months ago that's the reason why he got out of the bishopric, and that's why he's kind of in like this limbo area right now. So I kind of have this feeling like,
wow,
one or both of my parents might be in a pretty vulnerable stage, and if I can get a few minutes to just deconstruct their beliefs a little bit more, they might go from what you're talking about being this staunch believer to like in the blink of an eye, the twinkling of an eye, switching over to not believing it.
Man, they could. But what I didn't really realize, as a staunch atheist now for 20 years, is the point that John DeLynn makes and some other people like that make, that leaving the Mormon Church can really fuck you up. Right, if you are not mentally ready for what that will mean,
or
and
if you
it
don't
also
have some sort of grounding, some sort of landing place, some kind of community to get into, as opposed. I mean, because let's just face it, the sense of community in the Mormon Church is one of the best. It is.
Yeah, it's a strong sense of community. So you have to have the right surroundings. You want to be ready to do it. You know, it's not, I don't believe this anymore, therefore I'm going to be leaving tomorrow. You know, that may be not the right answer for a lot of people. And I think about my brothers, and my one brother in particular, you know, even if he didn't really believe in this anymore, it would be such a wrenching thing for him. His entire, not entire, but I'd say 90% of his social world would be affected and really shaken up. You know, if he were to leave the church ever, I think he'd come through it and he'd be stronger and much happier on the other end, because, you know, no more of this ridiculous guilt bullshit that's constantly foisted on you. The whole classic Christianity, you're broken and only I can, but happily I have the solution. Mm-hmm. You know, that all that garbage. You can't be better off living in this little infantilizing BS world.
And that's made abundantly clear just by statistics, by what we can measure, standard of living and happiness, or in general morale of people that are living in a certain area. I mean, the suicide rates for males in the age range from I think it's like 16 to 45 or something is the highest in Utah. Just because they have this massive burden of always towing the priesthood line, always being worthy to give somebody a priesthood blessing, which is a huge burden in and of itself.
Yeah,
so many layers piled on to that level of guilt that you're talking about.
Wow, well, that's great news. With your dad, I think you want to just. The challenge is to figure out if you can bring him out of it, but also how to do it without making it more painful than it needs to be.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm not sure how this is going to go down in the near future, but I actually found out the last Thanksgiving we were actually all over at my sister's house in Grand Junction, and we got into. This was on Sunday morning right before I was about to leave and my parents were about to leave and we were all going our separate ways. And I told them, hey, is it cool if I come visit? I'd have a thing going on and soon. And it was meeting a listener in Utah, right?
Okay.
And so they're like, yeah, sure, great, sounds good. What are you coming down for? I'm like, oh, I just got this thing. And so I was too mysterious about it. So they finally pressed me on it. And I said, well, let me step back for a second. So I kind of started this podcast, and instantly my dad's face dropped because he had randomly found it and Googled it and had listened to 2 episodes of it.
Oh my goodness!
And it fucked with him so much.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
so many levels. That's like, am I a failure as a parent? To bring up a Mormon child. Was that the main one?
Yeah,
that was the main one. Yeah,
it went down to exactly that. My mom hadn't listened to it at all. She wasn't aware of it at all. But my dad had just been randomly Googling the Blankenagel name and saw my name come up on David Michaels' show. And I think I had like 8 or 9 episodes out at that time. And I had 7. And he had listened to the polygamy special episode 7, which still remains one of my highest downloads.
Yeah, I think I downloaded that one.
All right, good. So he that was one of them that he listened to, and that was one that I was pretty abrasive against Joe, just talking about how much he liked to fuck little girls.
Yeah, well, there's no good way to put that.
Exactly, and I kind of just called it out. I mean, it's naked Mormonism. I mean, the history exists everywhere, but I'm taking a scathing look at it, and that's the episode that he happened to listen to, one of the episodes, and it fucking tore him up inside.
I guess.
I could tell I mean, to be completely honest, he like started weeping and stuff when we were arguing, and my mom was just completely in the dark, like, what the hell is going on here? And my dad had said, I was hoping that you wouldn't bring it up because I didn't want your mom to know about it, because I knew if she listened to it, she would feel guilty for having raised you wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the mind. This is still off the record part, but the mind fuck just continues. It goes to new layers of mind fuck.
Yes, exactly. And
like you think you've seen the worst, and then you realize, wait, there's a whole nother, power level here of an exponent of more mind fuck.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's one thing that I'm like I said, I'm not sure how this is going to play out in the near future, but I kind of have a sneaking suspicion that one or both of them are keeping up with my show.
Okay.
And I've had, my mom has made a couple of comments that she kind of might know a little bit of the content. And she even called me one night and was saying, it was the "why are you doing this" argument, right? The question, why
are you attacking the church?
Why are you attacking? I mean, you can spend you're such a smart kid. You should spend your brain power on something that's constructive instead of trying to deconstruct the church. And I'm like, well, I mean, it's something that I know. It's something that I've done thousands of hours of research on, and I want other people to know what's out there. I feel like I've been personally lied to. And at that point, I think she kind of internalized, like, he thinks that I've been lying to him the entire time. And at that time, and of course I said, no, it was nothing like that. I feel like the church is systematically constructed as a conglomeration of lies. Simple as that. That's all it is. I didn't use those big of words, but that's kind of like the argument that I tried to like portray to her. And at that point, she was like, you probably have a lot of information on your show, but there's probably
your book learning
that I could tell you about, the Adam God doctrine and people living on the sun. And I'm like, oh shit, Mom, you don't even know.
What is it? The holy incest theory that was, anyways, right. There's a total rabbit hole.
Yes, exactly.
A rabbit hole of crazy.
Yes, deep, twisting, winding rabbit holes. So,
I mean, there's the doctrinal problem, and actually, if you want to come back on the record, we can do that.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
But you're the master of the edit, so you know all about how to do that. But I see that the challenge with this church, or really any church, is there's different levels of twisted. To put it sort of politely, at one level is the irrationality of the doctrine. And, each one of these, take different Christian religions, and heck, we don't need to stick with the Christians. If you were born in Ethiopia, you'd probably be utterly convinced that the Kebra Nagast is a reliable source of truth. That is a scriptural set of books that they have studied and they believe, and it's come down through the ages. And I guess, though, that if I tracked down a copy of that, it would have just as many overt contradictions, factually ignorant statements, ghastly racist or homophobic morality lessons, or worse, in it than the Bible. But the people that read that book from their mother's knee, they think that it all makes perfect sense. Every one of these major and even minor religions, they are fundamentally illogical, irrational, and if they make any truth claims, they're demonstrably false. So there's that level of wrongness. But then the next level is, and it seems to be especially in Christianity and Christian-related religions, more than, say, Judaism or in Buddhism, etc., is the guilt angle. So in Christianity, sort of has a perfected the you're born broken and only Jesus can save you. And every time you don't live up to the ideal, you're making Jesus cry. You should feel terrible, right? That is another level of terrible. And then it goes even one further, which is, if you as the child of parents that are active in a church, if you stray from that way, now the parents, despite all of their efforts, now they are made to feel like they have failed. Even if they personally have done everything they could do in their own personal faith journey, they as parents have failed Jesus because they've let you, give me an amen, they've let you stray. It's just, they're layers of twisted piled on twisted. And how can that be healthy? It can't be healthy.
No, I think you're exactly right. And this is something that's built in systematically into the church with their sealing doctrine, right? I know you're probably quite familiar with it because you did the temple ceremonies, and I never did. I got out before. But, I mean, for any listeners that don't know, the sealing ceremonies basically make it so the family, you get married on the planet or on Earth, and then the sealing ceremony is what carries that marriage into eternity. And families are sealed together, parents to each other, parents to kids, children to the parents. I mean, it's incestuous, like you said, but it's the idea is built into that entire superstructure of the family. If the kids fall away from the church, it is somehow the parents' fault, and they are held to be responsible for it. And with the three different levels of the kingdom inside the Mormon heaven, the people that are in the lower tiers, murderers, adulterers, so on and so forth, people that are in the upper tiers can go down and visit them. However, apostates are people that go to outer darkness, people that have been members, that have known the truth and deny the truth, like yourself and I, right? The people that are apostates, the family members can't go visit them. They're just cut off forever. And that's the end. Simple as that. That's it.
Ridiculous.
So, yes, exactly. It's ridiculous, and it's systematically created to make parents responsible for their kids and kids responsible for the salvation of their parents. And
it's terrible.
It's very
and it's completely illogical. How can if heaven is eternal happiness, how could I be eternally happy if I know my daughter is off in hell? That doesn't make any sense. A 7-year-old can figure that out. It makes no sense.
Says in the Bible that they'll be cut off, and the people that are in paradise will forget their family members. But
well, you know what?
If make the argument that if you are the person that you are, and you have a member of your family removed from you forever, are you truly going to be the same person that you were before? Or is there going to be something different? I mean, there is biblically speaking,
of course you're not the
there's
same
going
person.
to be a memory block there. You are not going to remember them.
Oh, but remember, God's ways are higher than our ways, so we can't really understand that. And it's all very mysterious too.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
And that it's all only internally validated.
And it's not even internally consistent is the challenge, though. I mean, the pieces appear to interlock into this nice, there's a kind of puzzle that comes in a sphere, and all the pieces can be taken apart, and then you try to put them all back together, and they make a globe, but it's really hard to put them together. So that kind of puzzle, everything looks, Mormonism and many of these religions, they look like all the pieces fit together. But you really don't have to start pulling on too many threads before you realize they aren't. And so the way I think about it, Bryce, is that we're all atheists. Everybody on this planet is an atheist. It's just that when it comes to believing in gods, I believe in one less God than most other people.
I love that line. That's actually one of my favorite lines to use against a theist is, you
Yeah.
are
Oh,
just
you're an
as much an
atheist too.
atheist as me. You just
Yep.
decided to stop at one. Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect way to word it, that it adds kind of a unique perspective on it.
Yeah, and where that goes to the next is we occasionally have to use a couple of big words here, but epistemology, and so when somebody says, well, I don't believe in Zeus, but I believe in Jesus. Well, how do you know? Well, I just know. I have this person. They have this. They resort to a personal feeling, some sort of unverifiable, unexaminable personal feeling. And statement of the rightness of their position, and they don't seem to realize that every single other person that believes in some other God has the exact same feeling, which is proving the existence of the diametrically opposed, mutually contradictory God.
Yes, and that's okay. I'll actually tell you honestly, as I was going through my little sabbatical of doing all of this research and going from an ex-Mormon to this kind of like quasi-religious deist, and then into, before I became an atheist and decided it's all bunk, I had this just for a split second, I had this thought of, shit, maybe, just maybe, all of the religions are right. I mean, it may seem off the wall, but just maybe. And I let that thought marinate inside my brain for about 6-7 minutes.
Okay.
And I said, no, that's not possible, because so many of the tenets of these religions are completely mutually exclusive and contradictory to each other. There's no way that they can all be right, so therefore they must all be wrong. And that, I think that was kind of like the first like pure atheist thought that I ever had in my brain. That was less than 2 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, the way I like to put that argument slightly differently is they can't all be right, but they can all be wrong, and I think they are.
I like that.
It's a little bit of a twist, as opposed to saying they are all wrong. I think they are. You and I, between us, we think certainly they are. But for a theist who you're trying to bring along, to open their eyes to something they might have never thought of before, to say they can't all be right, but they can all be wrong, it's probably easier for that person to be open to versus just outright, slamming the door. You and I don't believe in, and we never did believe in, the Japanese god of Ama no Wakahiko, right?
No,
if you
I did not.
Research, no, you don't believe in that. So you research, he was sent to rule the earth, but he was killed by a sky god named Takami Musubi. So you and I don't have any trouble not believing in that. We don't have any trouble not believing in Thor or Zeus or Mithras or Ra or Apollo. We don't have any trouble not believing in any of those characters. But every person that does or did believe in those, that really believed.
They believed them at the same exact level that people today believe their current theological convictions.
Exactly. They knew they were right.
Yes,
they knew it.
They can't see a perspective from somebody else's eyes. And I mean, like you said, I use that terminology, that phraseology a little bit harder, just because this is atheist conversation. This is, just a rah slapping each other on the back conversation. If I am talking to a theist, I don't ever I hardly ever take like a hard line like that, just because it does invoke defensive mechanisms. You can't.
It can set those off. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
It can. I mean, the biggest problem that I don't think any religious person ever really has an answer to is the problem of suffering. And they'll pull some sort of crap where they're talking about, well, suffering is caused because man fell, and that's why we have suffering. It's a fallen world. But then that is just wholly unsatisfactory as a response. But that's often what you're going to hear.
Which, even just saying that invokes a whole new set of logical contradictions.
Absolutely.
Especially if you happen to subscribe to evolution, it all completely falls apart.
Completely.
Yeah, and it's the death knell of it. Yeah. Sorry. Anyway.
Well, it's that, and I always heard this term, and I would forget immediately because it sounded so weird. But the term theodicy, which sounds like Theo and idiot, which I guess those two things are related. But theodicy is actually the attempt to understand or to answer why God allows there to be evil/suffering. So that's called theodicy. And obviously, there's people have been talking about theodicy forever because it really is the most impossible to explain away with, no matter how much you wave your arms around. It's the most impossible thing to explain away in any religion that says that God is all powerful. And so we from a Christian point of view, we have the classic trifecta of all powerful, all knowing, and all benevolent, which are three mutually contradictory things, and even individually they don't make any sense. Mm-hmm. But if your God is going to be those things, how can he allow little children to suffer from malaria? Why would he even allow malaria to exist as a thing?
That seems like a very reasonable question. Honestly, very, very reasonable.
Very reasonable.
And I actually, my favorite approach to this is David Smalley's approach. His question, the problem of evil, which is it's the same, a different side of the same coin, right? When he says where after talking with a theist and saying where does morality come from, he says where does evil come from? And you look up Isaiah 45:7. It says, "I am God. I created the darkness. I created the light. I created evil." And it's blatantly in Isaiah, one of the founding prophets. God created evil. There's no escaping it. Simple as that. Why would an omnibenevolent or an omnipresent not omnipresent but omniscient being create evil? Just because it was a fun stumbling block for us petty little humans? Like, is it just fun to watch us suffer and
stumble around and hurt each other? No,
and die of our teeth coming in, and I mean, the contradictions are very, very deep as soon as you start invoking properties to a god. And that's another scathing atheist diatribe that I love is he doesn't take Noah doesn't argue for agnostic atheism. He argues Gnostic atheism, saying that I can know for a fact that your God does not exist. Because as soon as you try and stick a definition to your God, as soon as you try and put an attribute to this God, it instantly becomes logically inconsistent. And at very best, it becomes something that has no explanatory power. But at the very worst, it becomes completely contradictory with itself. Therefore, no God could possibly exist that has the attributes that you attribute to this God. And I think that's a logically tenable position to take. I think that it can be argued. I think Gnostic atheism can be argued. It's a hard line. It's hard to argue against, and it's only good for showmanship on debating. But I think it can be done, and I think Noah has a really good way of formulating the arguments for that.
So there's no God that essentially. There's no God that can be explained to have any useful properties that can also exist. Exactly. So if there is a God, he can't do any. She. I like to always say God when somebody's I'm talking to a theist and they're talking about God. I say, well, what do you think she wants us to do here? It always totally screws them up for at least 5 seconds. They're like, what? But yeah. So that I see what you mean. That if there were a God that had any demonstrable properties, that God could not exist.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I like it. Yeah, he's a treasure at No Illusions. He really is.
Absolutely. I was really glad to meet him and hang out with him.
Seriously. I wish that conference, I have to go to one of those. I've been to one atheist conference, and it was actually the Freedom from Religion Foundation conference last year in October. Okay. And they're definitely atheists, but their focus, of course, is on church and state violations, and actually, in a way, getting literal things done in the real world. And it's a wonderful thing that they do, forcing creationism out of schools and such.
And I think the FFRF is an absolute awesome organization. I mean, I'm a dues-paying member for almost a year now. Like I love their newsletter and everything. But I think that they don't really capture what ReasonCon was. No,
they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't.
Like, I mean, you know how this conversation you and I are having is just like a backslapping session. Like, yeah, good job, man. Yeah, theists, man. Don't they suck? Ha ha. Yeah, that's all that ReasonCon was, with lots and lots of alcohol.
I like it.
Right. No, it was absolutely
sounds good to me.
Amazing. I mean, this was my first conference ever, and I mean, I took a whole bunch of business cards just to hand out and say, "Hey, this is my show. Check me out." And
right.
I was flat out blown away. Like, I was hanging out with David Michael for most of the time, right? I was flat out blown away when somebody, like, I had this happen, I think 3 times there. Somebody walked up and pointed at me and said, "Blankenagel, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's me." And they say, "I love your show." And that was like a crowning moment of, oh my God, somebody is out there fucking listening to this shit. Are you kidding me? And it was just like this realization that it's like, hell yeah, this is why we come to these conferences, is like to recharge our tank, to get filled back up, to get new perspectives, just to have the fun arguments and to drink and have fun and to meet people and make friends. And I mean, it was absolutely amazing.
Really charges up the energy. We're not alone. You know, that whole side benefit. Yeah, the FFRF is a mature organization with 20,000 members and a board of directors and all that sort of stuff,
and an office building.
And a new office building. That's right, which is important. You know, we need people like that. They play a very important role at attacking through the legal channels. These blatant favoritism of magical, mystical Stone Age thinking. But like you're saying, that's not everything that we need. We need more than that. Mm-hmm. I like the way that Cash from Atheists on Air was, for some period of time, was like raising money to give to buy FFRF memberships.
Yeah, it wasn't just him. It was also No Religion Required, Bobby and Ashley.
Okay, yeah.
And then this other guy that I met down at ReasonCon as well, named Matthew the Apostle. He runs a podcast.
Heard of him.
Let me think. I just listened to like 3 or 4 episodes of his show. But he was handing out these little stickers at ReasonCon, and they were it said "Nothing fails like prayer." And
that's an FFRF statement. They always say that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of
Dan
what
Barker
he does.
Sings that.
He was doing this drive to try and get a bunch of memberships. But yeah, his show is called "In the Name of God" podcast, and he just takes on, in a not a very scathing format or anything. He just takes on it's kind of like just hanging out with Matthew. It's just hanging out with him, listening to him just talk on his recorder. It's really cool. He's a pretty intelligent guy. I recommend checking it out. But yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of podcasts that we're doing this fundraising to try and get more FFRF memberships. Just because, I mean, like Cash said, we're trying to save the fucking world.
The FFRF
is doing real shit out there, and we are trying to give them as much support as possible.
Yep, that's exactly that's the way he goes. Let me ask you about, are you familiar with Robert M. Price?
I just downloaded my first 3 episodes of the Human Bible today, and I got about 15 minutes into episode 33, and I'm like, no, I have to stop because I need to listen from episode 1 all the way through this. And I mean, I'm a huge fan of the Bible Geek.
You're teaching me something. I didn't know about the Human Bible. I always listen to the Bible Geek. I just love that thing.
Yeah, me too. Because I mean, he has like such a realistic approach to it, and he introduces all this new terminology and these different sects of religious sects that were existing in the area apart from Christianity, that were pseudo-Christian or proto-Christian. And it's like, oh my God, that all makes so much sense. Wow, when you just look at it, all you have to do is just know lots and lots of stuff. And
that's all.
That's all. Yeah, you just need to have, a doctorate in theology and, have spent your entire life studying it. And
studying and I've listened to enough Bible Geeks, and I'm looking right now in my library collection of several Robert M. Price books, plus the Legends of Genesis, which is one that he frequently referred to. And they're reading his books are just like listening to him talk. It's like exactly the same voice.
And I love how he does the voices and the accents.
Those are great.
I lose my mind every time. And I just listened to him do a Japanese one today on my drive home from work, and I was laughing my ass off. When he tried to say anachronisms with a Japanese accent, he was like, "It is anachronistic," and I fucking laughed so hard. He's a great dude. Yeah, I mean, I'm staring right now at Bart Ehrman and the Quest of the Historical Jesus of Nazareth that's sitting sitting on my bookshelf, and that's my next Robert Price / a whole bunch of other authors read that I'm excited for.
Good. Well, the cool thing about the Robert and Price canon and before him the Bart Ehrman, like misquoting Jesus and such. And now I've learned though that Bart Ehrman is a little bit of a quasi apologist, but still was that those books opened my eyes to the whole Christ myth theory, line of thinking, which I was never really even exposed to as something that even was a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you see that there's actually decades of scholarship on this exact, deep dive analysis of this exact thing.
That's the problem. Decades of scholarship. Whereas theologically driven Christianity,
motivated reasoning,
Christian historical study has always been with a Christian slant. It's always had the presupposition of Jesus being a historical person. And that makes sense because that's what you have to assume in order for Christianity to make sense. That's what Christian scholars have done
position
for hundreds of years. But we're talking decades of research that's been done on the mythicist or the minimalist theory or stance of the Bible. And it's like, holy shit, it all makes sense when you really think about it.
Well, Lasseter has a good book, or Lataster. I think it's Lasseter. Okay. That's not quite right, though. He's the guy on Pixar.
Okay, a little different.
Lasseter has a book on, which is a nice short Jesus didn't exist review, of the literature and the logical problems around there even being a historical character named Jesus. And even if there was a historical character, which he doesn't think there was, the Jesus of faith is certainly impossible. But I refer you back to the God works in mysterious ways.
Yes, you are correct. And that is the end all be all of the conversation.
Well, so my brother sent me this letter. It was a 3-page appeal to personal experience, therefore God.
Right.
But I love the guy, and it's very heartfelt, and he was facing some challenging situations, therefore God. And so I was really happy though that he had sent that letter, because when I talk to him, we just sort of have these sort of semi-snarky kind of veiled comments about reality, and I'll say something like, yeah, well, that person isn't really living fully in reality, which I think my brother interprets as meaning that person is religious, right? So he sent this letter, and then I was able to reply. But I've sent back this 10 pages. But the first page, I had a first page, and then the other 9 pages were like optional. Read this if you want to. You don't have to. But page one,
that's a smart way to do it. I like.
Yeah, I wanted to hit on page one. I wanted to basically set up the entire thing to thank him so much for writing the letter, and I really appreciated and respected that he had done that. And if I get a little bit strident below, don't take it personally. I'm an atheist. What does that mean? I'm good without God. I make moral decisions just like you do every day based on what I think is the right thing to do. And essentially kind of kicked it off with that. And then the details on different things like faith and what's wrong with faith and how the internet is going to crush you. Right. I didn't say it exactly that way, but
I mean, you got to be a little more eloquent when it comes to actually having a discussion like that.
But then I never heard back from him yet. I think I sent him the letter probably like on the 1st of March. So I don't know. Maybe there's a big faith crisis journey going on right now, and I just don't even know it.
Maybe, yeah. You don't know what's going on inside his head, and that's one thing that I found is oftentimes when people are having these contradictions inside their own head, they're capable of putting up a facade that doesn't show that they're having these problems.
Yeah.
I mean, but the problems still exist. The contradictions, the cognitive dissonance still exists, and that's
exactly the cognitive dissonance.
I mean, it'll really eventually chip away at the base of their logic. At the base of how they've reasoned to where they are. It's just a matter of time and a matter of thought. So I've taken up a lot of your time tonight. I did kind of want to just get to kind of like a closing topic, if you don't mind. I kind of wanted to ask, what you grew up in the Mormon religion. Do you still have some family members that are members of it that you're trying to talk with, that you're trying to reason out of it? I mean, aside from your brother, tell me a little bit about what place you and your family are in right now.
Yeah, I think, in a nutshell, although I don't have evidence for it, I think me turning away from the church in 85, 86 has put up a wall. And they're not going as far as, as the Seventh Day Adventists to quote unquote shun me, but I don't talk with them very often. I send letters and little comics from the newspaper, something that I know will tickle my dad's funny bone. I'll send him that. So I'd say at least once a month, if not more often, I'm mailing a short letter or some very brief note, not about atheism or anything, but just something humorous or an article from the paper. But I essentially never hear from them. And I think it's really sad, but it's so unnecessary. It's just one more destructive thing that religion does, of tearing families apart, or at the very least, building walls, inside families. Everybody lives far apart. So I'm in Northern California. One brother's in Southern California. One's in LA. One's in Vegas, and the family parents live in back east. And so we're not really all flying to visit every so often. And I'm sure that me not being an active member is not helping that.
So, are your parents still pretty deeply entrenched in? Or are they kind of dug in and still?
Yeah.
Believer?
Yeah, my parents are. My mother certainly. And when I go visit, it's interesting. I can actually have a more detailed conversation with my mother about some aspect of Mormonism than I can with my dad. Even though my dad, I think, was definitely more intellectual, and his approach to religion is certainly more intellectual than my mother. But I can talk to her more about, but Mom, how can X be possible? If if the flood covered the earth, where'd the water go? I can actually, if I ask my dad that, I'm not sure, probably get some sort of explosion of a response. Not that he's a short-tempered guy. I just, some people you feel like you can kind of probe a topic, and other people you feel, rightly or wrongly, that you really can't probe a particular topic, and sort of drill into something. You can't sort of reveal the absurdity of something, because you're just gonna trigger a shutdown.
Oh yeah, exactly. And once that wall is up, it's a hard thing to try and punch through. Or you can't just try and bulldoze through it. You have to slowly deconstruct the wall. You have to, or give them some time to let the wall fall down by itself. But that's the problem in the moment when you're having that discussion. It really it all comes to a close with the person just kind of shrugging off anything that you say. It's just bouncing off of that wall, and it's the
something like
a lot
that
of conversation, unfortunately.
Something like that, what you're describing, happened. My mom came to visit for some reason for 3 or 4 days, probably a year ago, and I had she's reading this exegesis of Isaiah, and I'm like, oh man, that is one ridiculous collection of garbage, and that's what I'm thinking. It's not what I'm saying.
Right? No, I get you though.
And I put out next to her, I had just ordered a copy of the Annotated Skeptic's Guide to the Bible, which is not cheap, but fabulous.
Yeah.
And I said, Mom, let's look at a couple of these verses from Isaiah, and the fact the Annotated Skeptic's Guide has little symbols that identify this section is logically impossible, or this section is racist, or this section is just flat out ghastly, right? And I'm pointing out these different parts of Isaiah that just don't make any sense at all. And it had no effect on her whatsoever. None. No effect.
And she's believing Mormon, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing that I like to use as a knockdown, drag-out argument against Book of Mormon authorship, is the Isaiah verses, right? So
the huge problem.
I'm sure you're aware of the Seraphim versus the Seraphims mistranslation from the King James Bible that's in the Book of Mormon.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so that's a good point. I just used the fact that it supposedly was taken in 600, but it has stuff that wasn't written until 550.
Yes, that was actually the second point that I was going to hit on. But yeah,
But I like yours.
There's a mistranslation that's only in a King James Bible, the 1650 whatever King James publication.
1611.
Yes, my mistake. So it mispluralizes seraph, because seraph is singular, seraphim is plural. It uses, I think it's twice in there, it says seraphims, putting an S to pluralize it, which is an English mistranslation into the King James Bible. Well, it has that, it uses that twice. That's a big glaring contradiction, because that problem wasn't in until King James. But you can also hearken to the authorship of Isaiah. So Isaiah, what we can figure is there was authored in 3 different pieces. So there's Proto-Isaiah, Deutero-Isaiah, and then Trito-Isaiah. Proto-Isaiah was Isaiah 1 through chapter 1 through, I want to say 39 or maybe 49. I could be mistaken. But it was written around like 650 BC, I want to say.
Yeah.
But then you have Deutero-Isaiah and Trito-Isaiah, which are not written until the mid 500 BC, around 550 or so BC, and they're written pretty close to each other. Well, these people that have, like you said, that this Isaiah chunk that is in the Book of Mormon includes chapters like 51, 52, and then some chapters even after that were all Deutero and Trito-Isaiah, which were all written after 550 BC, which could not have possibly been inside of the book, the plates that Nephi supposedly recorded. So two knockdown, drag-out arguments about the authorship of the Book of Mormon, obviously plagiarized from a King James Bible. Simple.
Obviously. I mean, it's irrefutable, and yet, pura se mueve, you have Mormons.
Exactly.
Somehow they can use that Galileo quote against us. I don't know how they do that, but sneaky devils.
Yes, indeed. So, all right, let me bring this to a close by asking one final question.
Okay.
You're obviously quite a learned person. You've done a lot of research. You've lived in a lot of places. I mean, obviously, you've lived a lot. You know your stuff. What do you see personally out of everything that you know about the Mormon religion? Because that's what this podcast is about.
Yeah.
What do you see as coming in the future? What is like the most damning thing that you think is in the history of the church? Or what do you see is going to be the downfall of the church coming up in the future? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, boy. So the second part first, what would be the downfall? I don't think that the church will ever die out. Just like you still have people that believe the earth is flat. There ain't very many of them, but they're out there. You have people that believe that that Xenu is and all the stuff from the Seventh Day Adventists, and you have these kinds of sects. They get smaller and smaller, and they get more and more radical, but they'll always still be at least a few of X out there. And even if they seem to disappear, 10 years later, whoop, they'll flare back up again. Right. So I don't think that the Mormon Church or any major religion that exists on the earth, at least right now, is going to completely disappear any time in the next 100 or 200 years. Despite, I wish that people would be more rational. I think that's really the only way for 7 billion people or 9 billion people to make it work is when we are reasonable and humanist and we think about human values and taking care of each other and taking care of the planet. So the second item first, I don't think Mormonism is going to disappear by any stretch. Okay. But the thing that is going to the thing that's going to really hurt Mormonism, I think, is that the young people have the most powerful computers ever invented that cost $200 on their hip. And every teenager, right? Where do the 30-year-old Mormons come from? Well, most of them come from being 16-year-old Mormons. The number of converts is lower than the number of homegrown. And children today, and everybody, including a 5-year-old that plays a game on a Kindle, right, on a Kindle Fire, they have the most powerful computing capabilities ever on their fingertips, at their fingertips, and essentially where you and I, and especially me, I would have never been able to find a list of the top 20 anachronisms in the Book of Mormon by reading anything in my parents' house. My library here in my house has over 2,000 books in it. My dad's library in his house, probably 800 books, and not one of them would have a list of the top 20 anachronisms in the Book of Mormon. And yet, any 9-year-old walking down the street with a smartphone that his big brother lent him can find the anachronisms in the Book of Mormon in about 30 seconds. And so what's going to kill the Mormon church, to the extent that any church is going to be killed, is the internet will make it, and is making it, almost impossible to hide the dirty laundry, the inconsistencies, and just the outright impossibilities of the religious systems.
Wow. I think that's very, very well said. I can completely agree with you. I was just having a discussion with somebody today that, we carry more computing power in our pockets today than the Apollo 11 moon lander had.
Way more.
Exponentially more.
Well, and see, the reason
that is the tool that is going to accelerate our society, I think, beyond the need for religion.
Well, and it already is, to a degree. Even this dialogue you and I are having on Wi-Fi on my laptop using a free telephone system that has better quality than the telephone, right? Mm-hmm. To do what? To put on a podcast, which didn't even exist 10 years ago, so somebody can listen to that on their smartphone. And the first iPhone was only invented in 2007. That's only 8 years ago.
Yes, that's really, really important to consider, to wrap it all into, is like let's say the miracle of modern computing, the ability of us to have a very candid conversation about our experiences in the church. We aren't bashing the church by any extent. We are talking about the history and our experiences and what we've learned about it. We can record this conversation, and I can put this up on the internet tomorrow or in a month or in a year, and people can listen to what we have to say about what we experienced, and they can leverage that experience for themselves. They can grow up in the Mormon church and take our journey with us and live the Mormon religion vicariously through us, and realize, and not have to go to the entire work of a wasted lifetime of living, believing in the church. So I think that seems like it's going to be just kind of, that will be a very, very large nail in the coffin of the Mormon religion and of other religions as well. I mean, the older they get, the more disconnected they are from our ability to historically analyze them. But I think that's all. It's all coming to a head. It's all coming out in the wash, and we're gonna find out some very interesting things as modern scholarship evolves. I think there's going to be some interesting things that we found out.
But those things, they almost don't matter as much as the even larger trend. And I kind of think of my daughter as to some degree representative of this trend. And I won't speak for her, but my interpretation of the way she and people in her generation think of religion is they don't. It doesn't answer any question in any satisfactory manner that they have.
And if they don't have to ask a pastor for an unsatisfactory answer to a question they have, when they have something way smarter than a pastor in their pocket.
No, and why would they go to that place? So these concepts of community and friendship and society and feeling part of a group, to the extent those things are met by me being part of 6 different meetup groups instead of going to church for 3 hours on Sunday morning, then a person doesn't need to go to church to receive that social aspect. Overall, Putnam even in the 90s, I think, when he wrote Bowling Alone, he identified that American culture, at least, is moving towards people being not parts of larger organizations as much, and really being more one individual or two people types of groups. So smaller groups doing things, going to the movies alone, or going bowling alone, or with one friend instead of the whole bowling league, right? And so, yeah, bowling alone is an interesting, it's a little old now, but still an interesting assessment of the direction. But there's so many different ways now with social media and other ways for people to be part of things. And so if I don't need to be part of a church to be part of a group, and I don't need a church because they all have feet of clay, no matter how lofty their statements are, in reality we find they were actually founded by this or that charlatan, or a guy, imagine this, founded by a guy who in 1843, if I recall, moved assets into his relative's name so he could declare bankruptcy. Then the freaking judge said, "You're not bankrupt, you're a con man." You know, when you find that a guy, oh wait, was that Joseph Smith? When you find that a guy like that founded supposedly, was the prophet, well, we got a problem, right? We got a huge problem with that. So church is generally not necessary, doesn't solve any problem. And, the charity aspect is wonderful. Churches do charitable things. People can be charitable without a church. The FFRF gave, I just saw $10,000 relief beyond belief is what they call it, relief beyond belief, to help in the situation in Nepal. As people move away from church and they say, how can I support, how can I be charitable, but do it without having to do it through this Jesus lens, churches become less and less necessary and useful and needed, day by day. And that's a good thing.
Yep, that's all that we can hope for, is that will continue on a positive trajectory, and that we'll continue to gain more and more people to the movement of, living beyond belief. I think that's important. That's the best for everybody. But I guess that'll probably bring us to a close. Is there any last thing that you wanted to throw out there, or anything that you wanted to plug? Do you have a blog or anything to plug?
No, I don't. I'm a consumer of content, not really a creator of new content right now.
You are right now, though. Honestly speaking,
what do you know?
Creating content right now as we speak. So, in your own way, you're contributing, and I mean, just on the record, I would really like to thank you for your patronage and for supporting the show. That's contributing in your own way. You may consume the knowledge and the information that's there, but being a listener and supporting the show and listening to the show, that's the best part. That's my favorite part, and I just wanted to thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for doing this. I wish it had existed in 1976.
Yes, indeed. I think we would be better off for it, but I guess we'll see how it looks in another 25 years, and we'll assess it from then. But thank you for joining me for this little interview special edition episode.
Thank you, Bryce.
All right, and I'll chop that up and add in a little intro and an outro, and then that'll be up and good to go.
Great. And so when the classic question then is, like, in a week or two?
That's kind of a tougher one to say. I have this is just my second one that I have in my little discussion bank. So,
sure.
It'll probably be used fairly soon. I would say probably within the next month, maybe.
Okay. Well, send me an email if you would, just when you're putting it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to even send you a proof of it. And I did want to ask, and you said your kid's name in there. Do you want me to beep over that or just pull it out?
I guess so. Yeah. I was thinking that that's probably better.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be happy to do that.
I don't think I put anybody else's name.
No, I think it was. You never said your last name or anything. I think it was all just Jay.
Yeah.
And that was it. Oh,
I wouldn't be that hard to find, though. There's not that many atheist trail running former Mormons.
Probably, especially out
there's a few
North Cali.
Yeah, amongst the 6 million people.
Yeah, no kidding. Exactly.
All right. Well, I'll look forward to hearing it, and I hope it. I'll be interested to hear what it sounds like. I probably sound very angry, and we didn't go into that, but I am still. I wasn't angry for a while, and then I started to realize how fucked up this thing made, how much this fucked me up.
Right, exactly.
And that made me angry, really. And it was after Prop 8 I started to think, wait a minute, this really screwed with me. not just the 2 years that, year and a half I wasted wandering around trying to convert Chinese people to our idiot religion, but it really was a terrible thing and still is.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I wanted to ask you about it, but I forgot. I'm hoping that once I get a few of these all brought together and a few people have these discussions and I post a few of them, I'm wanting to do like a big Google Hangout with just a whole bunch of ex-Mormon patrons. Just everybody that wants to come on, just go on to Google and talk it out and just like talk about our current view of the church, how, if we're experiencing anger or just acceptance of it, or just, that's something I think that I think a lot of people could benefit from, just a whole bunch of former Mormons hanging out. Good.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun.
Sweet. Awesome.
That will be fun.
Yeah, but I mean, thanks for joining me tonight. This was a party, Jay. This was absolutely just great. A lot of fun. So thank you.
I enjoyed it too. I just should have had more beer handy.
All right, me too. Mine's completely drained and my water bottle's drained too.
Don't.
Oh well. No,
right.
We'll know for next time. We'll be prepared.
All right. Thanks.
Awesome. Talk to you later.
All right. You be safe. Take care.